Hi, Dan.
Hi, how are you doing? We had
I'm
some
very
technical
good. I'm
problems.
very good.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm delighted that you were able to join us. Can you hear me
Oh, good.
okay?
I can hear you beautifully. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. And I was just saying, I hope my accent doesn't cause a problem because sometimes a Scottish accent can be a little bit strong. So we'll do our
No,
best.
no, no. It sounds very familiar, so it's very good.
Great. I was just going to do a little introduction. I mean, everyone on here is very excited about you being here, and as am I, because I read a lot of these books in my work, and yours is right up at the top there of my list. And
Oh,
I,
great.
I don't say that lightly. You know, I'm really, I'm quite critical sometimes of certain books, but your book was exceptional, and I remember reading it and unfortunately, I am one of these people that turns the corners over on pages and highlights things, and that's a well-read book.
Good
Um,
for you. Yeah.
but your expertise, of course, you studied at Harvard, and you're an expert in your field, and you've written many books on this subject. Would that be
Yes.
correct?
Yes, I have.
What was the inspiration for the Whole Brain Child? What inspired you to want to write that book?
Well, I had written a textbook called The Developing Mind, How Relationships in the Brain Interact to Shape Who We Are. And then with my daughter's preschool director, Mary Hartzell, we wrote a book that translated the science of attachment for parents to basically help them learn how to make sense of their own attachment histories. That book was out in the world as of 2003. And then I had a student named Tina Bryson who had a young baby at home. And as she became more involved in our Mindsight Institute, she was raising her children as my wife and I were raising our children with these basic principles in mind. And so we thought it would be exciting to talk about the practical applications, not only of making sense of your life, but how you could use these in everyday parenting. And so that's what inspired Tina, who then became a colleague of mine after being my student. And I decided to write The Whole Brain Child, was to really show how practical these science-based ideas are.
That's what I like. I like a practical book. You know, I like a book with lots of different exercises in it. And I have to say that I actually practiced with my 4-year-old goddaughter one of the techniques, and it was magical. It was so amazing to watch how she was struggling with something. And I used your technique of helping her to connect the left and the right side of the brain together, you know, expressing
Yeah,
emotion. What a difference. It just totally diluted the potential for a tantrum or of lots of issues that might have come up.
exactly.
But
Exactly.
I'm not sure if you're familiar, perhaps you are, with the paper, The Mindful Nation, that one of our
Yes.
students, and she was just asking, you know, how can we make, she called it meditation. I know some people call it more comfortable with the word mindfulness, but, you know, how can we make this more accessible to children and families? Did you have any thoughts about that?
Sure, it's a great question. And the idea, it begins with the word parental presence. The idea that how we're present for life, how we're present for our children, is really about how you can be available, how you show up, how you're connected to what's happening with your child as it's happening. And so, in this perspective, then the word mindfulness, which doesn't have a fixed definition, but it's about being aware of what's happening as it's happening without worrying about judgments that are maybe imprisoning you. It's about being open, really, to who your child is. And so, in this way, everything we teach in the Whole Brain Child has presence as its core, and it's certainly one of the principles in parenting from the inside out. So, if the question is it important? The answer is yes. The second thing is, how do we teach it then in schools? How do we teach it? And this is why there's the Whole Brain Kids part, where you see how to actually teach this to children in all these different settings. And we've had a lot of teachers actually use the book for how they approach kids in the school. And it's all about the specifics of how to be present, really, how to create this mindfulness.
In your book, you talked about mindful insight,
Mm-hmm.
a neutral phrase, especially if people are uncomfortable with the whole idea of mindfulness or meditation. But So that really kind of reflects what you were saying, which is, it's about the presence of the adult around these children, first of all, and that gives some kind of direction then to how they can help that child, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And the helping the child and being connected to the child really requires intention, openness. So that's why I really like the word presence, the idea of parental presence. Not just are you physically there, but are you mentally there, meaning are your feelings available to your child? Are your thoughts available? Can you be more open-minded about what's going on with you and then how you connect with your child? So in all these ways, you have opportunities to be more mindfully insightful, to be more present, to have this approach. And it's something anyone can do. And we've shown it really helps students directly if the teachers learn how to have this presence.
I think that's an important point. Although it's not necessarily meditation, we need to be with our children. I suppose meditation and mindfulness teaches us how to have the presence with our children, because we're able to focus on our breath or our body and not react to the situation, and to tap into, to remember some of the ideas that you write about in your book, actually.
Right. Exactly.
Some people think that children, if we're trying to encourage children, whether this is relevant to, to meditate or to be mindful, some people think that you have to reach a certain level in your brain development, 8 or 10 years old, before you can actually teach children that. Would you agree with that, or do you think?
Well, we did a study at our Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA that showed you could teach this idea of being open to what's happening without being swept up by impulses and judgments. So if you want to use that as a definition of mindfulness, you can teach it through games, for example, that we did a study with Susan Kaiser Greenland, and we studied those, the application of those games to 4-year-olds and even 3-year-olds. And we showed in our research study very significant decreases in bullying and increases in the ability to regulate your impulses and your emotions. So it is true, you don't need to teach those kids to meditate. Unfortunately, I think people very understandably equate the word being mindful with being a meditator. Two very different things. You can become more mindful by doing mindfulness meditation, but you can become more mindful without ever meditating. I try to talk about that in a book called The Mindful Brain, and in this last book, Mind, A Journey to the Heart of Being Human. I kind of tease that apart because I think people have understandably pushed back a little bit on formal meditation that you have to follow in one school or another. But the idea is more a state of mind you can create as a teacher, as a parent, as a child. We want a child who naturally has this presence to be able to really take what they naturally have and grow it even more. And this is where for some children, let's say who have impulse problems, they hit when they get frustrated. Teaching them to be mindful allows them to have a space between their impulse and their action.
From the work you've written about the prefrontal cortex at the front of your brain, which is the last part to fully develop, in the early 20s. And that's all about being able to self-regulate, and as you know. But so it's amazing if just with some mindful games then, children who's...
So let's put a broader developmental view on that. What you're saying is absolutely true, but actually a lot of executive functions which depend on the prefrontal cortex mature around 7 years of age. And they're growing between around 2 and 7. So while it's true, we're going to keep on developing into our mid, 20s where adolescence is flourishing, and even continue to develop even as adults. Around 7 is actually the age you really see a deep maturation of the prefrontal capacity on impulses. Yeah. So it's important to realize that from a brain point of view. And part of why Tina Bryson and I wrote The Whole Brain Child was because you can teach techniques to grow the integrative capacities, which are executive functions of the prefrontal cortex when your child is 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. And, if you look at the studies of Michael Posner, by 7, those functions are pretty mature. What we want to do is intervene before that, right? So
yeah. I was going to say, because with complex trauma, and some children who have a very difficult start in life in terms of their exposure to certain environments and maybe the people in their lives too, does that mean, do you feel then that if that maturation of that part of their brain is already in place, if we teach them mindful games or mindful activities, that would that help? Or it might be just a theory, would it help children with complex trauma if we were to work in these mindful games with them?
Yeah, it should, because the way to think about it is this. If you look at the studies of Marty Teicher, Teicher, and McLean Hospital at Harvard University, what Marty has very powerfully shown was that what developmental trauma does to the brain, and this would be severe abuse and severe neglect that he studies, is it impairs the growth of integration in the brain. Depending on the timing of the developmental trauma, will determine which integrative areas are not growing well. So the way to think about it in the large way is with the term called the connectome. That is, the differentiated areas of the brain throughout the brain are linked, and that we call the interconnected connectome. That's a new term that's used in the last couple of years. What Marty was able to show is that developmental trauma makes the connectome, the different areas, less interconnected. That's number one. Then specific areas are, as we're talking about, the prefrontal cortex, which links, if here's your hand model of the brain, the prefrontal cortex links the cortex at the top, the limbic area in the middle, the brain stem, and then this stuff coming up from the body with the social world, these 5 different sources of energy and information flow: cortical, limbic, brainstem, body, and social. Those 5 energy and information flow sources are coordinated and balanced by the prefrontal cortex, and that is a massively integrative area, right? 5 things that are separate, bringing them together. So integration is defined as the linkage of differentiated parts. These are the 5 differentiated parts, and they're linked. So prefrontal integration is also impaired. The corpus callosum, linking the differentiated left and right that you mentioned earlier, those are impaired. And the hippocampus, its growth is also impaired. So the way to think about it is developmental trauma blocks the growth of integration, but integration can grow at any time throughout the lifespan. So of course, we want to prevent trauma if we can. But we don't need to think that, oh my gosh, the early years are over, so it is impossible to help this child. No. There's lots of exciting evidence to support the idea that neuroplasticity, how the brain grows in response to experience, continues throughout the lifespan. And what we want to do then is be very strategic and specific and supportive in growing integration in the brain. And amazingly, but if you look at the studies of mindfulness in adults, at least, we haven't done the studies in children yet, but mindfulness in adults, guess what? It grows the hippocampus. It grows the corpus callosum. It grows the prefrontal cortex, and it makes the connectome more interconnected. So when you read this in the book Mind, where these studies are very new and this book just came out, you'll see this amazingly optimistic and very specific reason why mindfulness, theoretically for children and adolescents, should be really, really specifically helpful from a brain point of view, because it actually, in people who haven't been abused, these were in just the general population, in general, what we know as a starting point is that mindfulness makes the brain more integrated. Developmental trauma has made the brain less integrated. Because of neuroplasticity, we ought to be able to grow the integration of the brain throughout the lifespan. So let's go for it. Let's use every opportunity, mindfulness, therapy, good relationships at home, because integrated relationships also promote the growth of these integrated fibers.
That's amazing. And it's I think it's such a positive message to give to people, especially I'm working with some foster care situations and children who experience complex trauma. And it's just really encouraging to know that not all is lost, that there's so much can be done.
Yeah, there may be more work working with a 30-year-old that's been traumatized that never got help versus a 3-year-old, because all that lifetime of, reinforcing the non-integrated state. And now you've had a 30-year-old that's had all those years. So, of course, earlier is better, but later is never too late.
The one thing I was going to ask you, is there one thing that parents can do that can positively help a child's development? And if there was, what would that be?
Yes. You brought it up beautifully at the beginning of our talk together, which is parental presence. If you as a parent, whether you are the birth parents or foster parents or adoptive parents, those are all biological parents. And why I say that is experience that you provide wherever the origin of the child is, but you're now taking care of this child. The experiences you provide for this child are biology. So what I say when I've been in the UK talking to, adoptive and foster parents in the UK, I say, you are the biological parents. Let's not, have a term, those are the biological parents. I'm just, in quotes, just adoptive parents. That's not logical. Biology is experience. Experience is biology. So a parent raising a child who didn't get born through their sperm or egg is the biological parent. It's not the birth parent. We can grant you that's not the birth process, wasn't a part of your life with them, but now you are the biological parent. So what can you provide biologically that will optimize the growth of any child, and particularly a child who's had developmental trauma? Well, we begin with parental presence. So the reason that I've been systematically trying to put out books about children and adolescents is because there's a kind of a very practical application that can be done in a very systematic way. So what I would say to parents is this: parental presence is the way to begin. So if you look at studies of parenting, it boils down to this. If you can provide integration for your child, whatever their age, and that means honoring differences, that's the differentiation of integration, and promoting linkages, compassionate, respectful communication, you're going to do this through your presence. So what does that mean? Start with parenting from the inside out. That comes from the science that says no matter what you've been through, you could have been through horrendous, horrible trauma, but if you've made sense of that trauma, you'll develop this parental presence, this mindful way of being, this way of being available to your child, this way of creating an integrated relationship. And amazingly, if you begin with parental presence, presence is the doorway, the portal for integration to arise inside your child's brain. You need to start there. Step 2 is you say, okay, fine, I'm doing that work of parenting the inside out. Now I take on the whole brain child approach, and that will teach you very specific things you can do to stimulate the growth of integration in your child's brain. And how do you as a parent understand the nature of development? You can use these science-based findings to inform your parenting in this way that is so, as you've seen with your godchild, they're so useful because they're totally based on science. They give you an empowerment that isn't so much like an exact child does this, you do this, child does that, you do this. It gives you an overall way of living and being yourself that then comes very naturally. So you become a whole brain parent in many ways as you do this. So parents who do that have been very thrilled with the results.
Yes, and what you're saying is that that empowerment also brings compassion, because I think when we understand that 4-year-old is doing this or that that this is what's going on with them. We understand, and from an adult brain we have compassion, and then we ultimately have kindness for them as well, and patience with them. I feel like my whole library is now going to fill up with many of your books, with all the ones that you mentioned. I will put links on this for anyone who's joined us, and we'll put this out to all our subscribers as well. And I just can't thank you enough for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Dr. Dan Siegel, have a wonderful day.
Excellent. Good.
Thanks ever so much.
Great to connect.
Bye now. Bye for now. Bye. He was an absolute inspiration, and just incredibly insightful. Everything that he said, everything that he taught us, everything that he shared. You know, I'm in awe. I'm in absolute awe. And yes, I can't wait to get my hands on a few more of his books.
I wanted to share with you the technique that I used with my goddaughter, which I mentioned in one of the earlier parts of this interview with Dr. Dan Siegel. I just actually started reading The Whole Brain Child. And if I explain the scenario for you, it gives evidence to how these techniques work, how this mindful presence works. Now, I was not in my own home. I was in the place where my goddaughter lives. Her mum was making dinner and extremely busy, as people generally are at dinner time. And she was asking for something, and she was her mum was trying to be very patient with her and asking her what she wanted. And she kept repeating herself, and her mum, trying to do the dinner, was trying to listen to her and give her answers. And my goddaughter was 4 and getting increasingly frustrated. So I could see that it was going to erupt. So I led her gently through to the living room, asked her to join me, and she sat on the sofa, just about ready to erupt. And I just, as he said, practiced that mindful presence and just noticing my breath, trying to stay calm and not trying to fix things, but just asked her, what is it what is it you're trying to say? And she repeated what it was that she was trying to say. And I repeated that back to her phrase. And then I added in a little bit of the emotion and said, I wonder if you're feeling quite frustrated or upset or annoyed. And she just kind of nodded her head. And I just said, that must be really difficult when you've got something that you want and you're trying to express it, and people around you can't hear you, understand you. And she nodded again. And I said, yeah, that would make me feel that way too. So can I help you? And she just said, no, it's okay now. And she absolutely had calmed down at this point. And what I saw in front of me was a situation where this little girl was she was trying to get something, as children do. She was asking for something or wanting something. And it was just a difficult time in order to support her. And she was just frustrated. And instead of it just manifesting into this kind of meltdown, just those few moments, and it was no more than maybe a minute maximum, 30 seconds of helping her identify maybe a few words that she might be feeling, repeating back to her the situation, what had happened as well. So the logical, factual part of it, what she was trying to say, and identifying the feeling, and then going back to that logical part saying, okay, so this is what you were asking for, this is what you need. And by then it was over. She didn't need it. And this is one of the things that Dan Siegel talks about in his book, where children have experiences all the time and they need to process that experience with the whole brain. So they have the logical, kind of rational aspect of it, and then there's the emotional, more creative aspect to it. And if a child only is led to process it with the logical part, then the emotional part doesn't get the chance to integrate into it. And the same as vice versa. If it's only the emotional part, then the rational part doesn't get to integrate into it. And basically it's about helping that child process it with both sides of their brain. So I hope that small example demonstrates just that this is something I've talked about a lot in all the times I've been teaching people about meditation and mindfulness, and how we can be mindfully present with our children in order to help them express with both sides of their brain and help us help them as well.